All right, let's
Yeah.
get started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So first, thank you, Dana, for joining us from New York, and Tunde from Mortal, I heard. I'm in Brussels.
Yeah.
So we
Hi,
received quite
Tefo.
a lot of questions from the audience.
Hmm.
Some of them I will be asking Dana, and some of my own questions.
Hmm.
So I will start with a very broad question, which is, what made you start Haven for Artists, and can you tell us something about it?
So Haven was founded in 2011, and it
Mhm.
was mainly founded under the premise that there was no collective spaces for artists that could go together and perform, rather than it being a competitive field. So it's always been a competitive field in that regard as to our bookings, whether it be doing gigs in bars or venues or events. It was always kind of separating us. So the premise of Haven originally was to allow for artists to come together so that they could kind of base their inspiration on one another, to grow together, and to give them a collaborative platform rather than a competitive one. Especially in Beirut, there was a lot of lack for that, as places where artists can come together and discuss things, accessible places. Haven's entrances were $2, $3, mainly just to pay for back end, the let's say sound equipment rentals or any of that. So we tried to make sure that everything was extremely accessible for the community, and extremely accessible in a sense of it's not just about affordability, but also access, as in being able to approach all of these artists at the same time and being able to be exposed to these artists at the same time. So we first started quite small. We had like 50 people come to our events, and we had 5 artists. And the last that we got was around 1,000 attendees and 38 artists. We've done festivals that had 128 participating artists and over 3,000 people throughout the thing. 3,000, I think, is a big number, maybe a little bit less. So it's all about just being able to change the scenery, making sure that people have access, and making people understand that it's all about collaboration, and that's kind of lifting each other up together. We've had wonderful festivals all over the country. We've had them on the beach side. We've had them in the forests. And we've also had exhibitions in, institutional galleries such as the French Institute, or in more of a pop-up scenario, like places like Station Beirut. So it all, varies according to the theme of whatever the project is. But the entire kind of initial premise was to ensure that we had a collective platform where people can exchange tools and ideas and knowledge, and at the same time be able to grow together rather than to compete with each other.
So it's very art focused, but it's also a queer space, right? Or
Well, you're
do you?
talking about the spaces. So when
Yes,
Haven was
yeah.
originally founded, it was a pop-up. So it would pop up every
Hmm.
month. It would happen in a different location. And then it built up to opening safe spaces. We're not, when we say we are a safe space, we're a safe space for everyone. For the women's community, for the LGBTQI community, for marginalized community, for migrant workers, for whomever really needs a space, they had access to this, this open space that they can come and use and utilize the tools and all of the different equipment that we had around. That we had workspaces they can work in. So it really just depended on what you needed. You can come and find that in the space.
And how do you make a safe space? I mean, how do you keep it safe?
With a lot of communication. I think
Mhm.
it's important to also understand that there are a lot of people can come in that can be homophobic, and it's not about just closing the door and shutting it in their face. It's also allowing for a little bit of conversation, because some aren't aware that they're maybe doing homophobic remarks. So of course, first you try to communicate. If communication fails, that's when you of course preserve the safety of everyone in your space and ask that person to leave. But always to have an open form of dialogue so that you can kind of build on whatever the situation is and try to educate as much as possible. If you see that this person is just stubborn and very angry, then that's a different story, and that's not my responsibility to teach you how to be a better human being.
Yeah.
My main mission is to ensure that everyone within the space remains safe and secure and isn't offended or bullied or shamed or any of
Yeah, because I can imagine that it takes a lot of effort to do this communication all the time, or to
those. Yeah.
educate, or to take this position.
Yeah.
So it's maybe not possible to do all the time. And do you have like a permanent team at Haven
Yeah,
who
yeah. We're we're
is
uh, we're we're a big volunteer team. So all of us in
Mhm.
Haven, we're all volunteers. We all work without compensation, and the entire premise of it is to ensure that we are constantly growing. Our main core team has been the same for the past couple of years. I think 3 or 4 years. But of course, the volunteers, the outer team, the extension of the main managing team grows and changes according to people that are coming. They have time now to really want to invest into this, and some opt to leave the country, some stay in the country. So it's all about just growing with the times and always adjusting to whatever the community needs at that point.
And have you faced challenges with Haven? I mean, I'm thinking like funding wise or the political climate. But I guess first funding wise, like how do you sustain an organization like this?
Well, we've been self-sustainable for the past 10 years. We received our first fund last year, which was from UAF, which was the Urgent Action Fund. Other than that, we mostly work out of pocket. We try to host events as much as possible in order to sustain that event. So the event itself sustains itself, and then we continue from there. And Haven, as a team, works very hard to try to raise funds left and right to pay for rental spaces and to pay overheads. But most of us, we just do it out of the love for the arts and pretty much the to advance human rights and advance LGBTQI rights and women's rights.
Another question we got from the audience is whether the art scene, the art world, is connected to the queer scene in Beirut.
So there is of course a connection between the two. There's always going to be a connection, mainly because you have the artists working together in these two domains. It's connected, yes and no. See, hold on, because I had it written down, but I think it's best if I just kind of, I guess, wing it.
Sounds good.
So they are connected and not. So they're connected in the sense that artists that are here are there and here and there. This also connects to another question that I think we also had, is identifying as queer art. I think it's important for some particular areas for representation, because we don't see it otherwise. At least in Lebanon, it's extremely difficult because is censorship. We also have censorship laws. So it's not just about being out there and being visible. It's also about making sure that you don't get arrested for doing whatever art show that you are doing. It is connected, but they aren't, they're not mutually exclusive. So there are artists that work in both, obviously. But the difference is Haven is an organization not just for the arts, it's for arts and activism. It's the intersection of these two. And this is something that we've grown into. And I believe the part of it is never having a conviction where we never change that. The only convictions we have are
causes. But we grow with it, of course. And if originally, let's say, we didn't focus too much politically, now we do. It depends on the times and the space that we're in and what our community needs. They're connected, and no, they're not connected, because again, censorship laws automatically prohibit a lot of freedom of expression. So there are some spaces that, go out on a limb and exhibit art, and there are a lot of spaces that don't.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a bit about the kinds of projects you do at Haven? And I was wondering if maybe Tunde, since you've visited Haven as well, if you might give me like an impression about what's happening at this space, well, the space you have.
Do you want to go, Tunde, or should I? Okay, so we've done a lot of different shows. We had an in-house gallery. So this is had because we closed the space in October during the Lebanese Revolution. We're moving towards a new space, but then Corona happened, and then we're like, okay, we obviously cannot open a space currently and invite people to come into it without ensuring that we are 100% capable of doing, keeping the safety precautions and the security. And there's no way to really do that. So our job now is to make sure that we've created safe spaces for our team and within our community outside of physical space. Just giving them access to be able to continue to create their pieces and to continue to create their work and to continue their research, continue their campaigning. So that's how we've kind of shifted now. But our space before had a gallery room, it had a residency, it had a shelter program, it had a small cafe that kind of sustained itself. So the little cafe would actually pay the salaries of the individuals that are working within the cafe. So it would be, you pay $3. Well, that was the old currency. Now it's, if you technically look at the currency, now it's $1. But back then, when our currency was still okay, you pay $3 and you get unlimited coffee throughout the day. So it was just kind of a way to support the space itself, but at the same time to ensure that we can support the artists that are coming. So you don't have a waitress going around your table the entire time. You're not in a standard cafe of this is a consumer kind of place where you're exchanging money for space. Whereas for us, it's like, okay, this is 5 thou, which was $3.33. You pay that, and then you can sit for 12 hours, have access to internet, have access to all of our utilities, have access to all of our staff and our members and our network and our work ourselves as projects and as particular artists in that form. Let's say if you're a filmmaker and you need a writer, you can reach out to a writer sitting right next to you. And if you're a researcher and you're working on, if you're, let's say you're researching a project for activism that's circled around human rights or women's rights or LGBTQI rights, you can actually directly have access to filmmakers that are working in the space. You can have direct access to visual artists and whatever it is that you need to strengthen your campaign and make it reach the greatest value of people, the greatest amount of people. So that was the premise of the space. So we had exhibitions every month, one exhibition a month for one of the artists in residency or local artists, depending on who wanted it. And we would build on that. And then every 6 months, we'd have a massive exhibition, which would utilize all of our residents and all of our local and regional artists. The last one we had was Vices and Validation, which was held in the French Institute. And it had, I think it was 33 artists, 33 of which, over 98% of which identified as female. And then we do that. So what we do is we collectively as a space give that space for everybody to work and to build. And then of course, every 6 to 9 months, we hold a massive exhibition for their work.
Yeah. I mean, another thing maybe just to add shortly is that while I was there, I mean, of course, there was also a tiny shop. I think you forgot to mention that, Dayna, where I bought, they sold local kind of things, and also books and stuff. I bought myself a nice Keltum sock from there.
From
Yeah, so I'm going. That's also probably going to kind of supporting those who are working at the cafe and the artists too. When I landed in Beirut, it was probably already around 10 or so, and I remember the taxi driver, Shakir is his name, taking me to the space, and I walked into a space that was people like in a circle and engaging in poetry, exchanging in poetry. So that was my first kind of impression. It was nighttime, and it was like all these words and all these people, beautiful folks, and just kind of really sharing honestly and openly. And I remember my first impression was what's the name of that British poet again? Sam? No, is it Sam? No, it's not Sam.
Lisa
I can't. Yeah, Lisa Lux. Yeah. So I didn't know who. I didn't know I knew her, but I was like, oh, who's this? English person here. It was my first impression. But that there was that, but there was also what was also really interesting is how Haven, although it's kind of hidden actually from the street, there's a house in front of it, and it's kind of set back. And what's really kind of interesting is though it still attracts, kind of, the local community, but also international community. Not only that night were there a lot of students from kind of like the American University,
AUB,
AUB. There were, who came to kind of hear and exchange with Lisa Lux and also share their poetry. There was also, I remember, Dayna, you gave a sort of talk, kind of workshop situation for the design school.
So it was Alba. They were doing social change for design. So those are a lot of the elements that we also had. We had screenings every Sunday. We had talks all the time with different organizations and institutes to bring in and to kind of give free workshops and free, just information all the time about what is going on and what can you do. So you'd have, great organizations like ARM, which is the anti-racism movement, come in and do talks. You have Helim, which is an LGBTQI organization that works directly for services and rights of LGBTQI persons in Lebanon. They would also come in and talk. You had all these organizations. So it wasn't just about Haven being an organization itself and also always giving talks as Haven. Our premise was to be that medium.
and to always allow for people to, not just allow, but just to encourage people to open dialogue. If you don't know what's going on, the best way to find out is to come and ask them questions and put them on the spot. And to, you know, just make sure that you're as free and as uncensored as you possibly can be, because we usually are very censored. Not so much as censored, but we're like selective in how we speak. Just because, you know, there are so many different elements to every conversation that we have. Whereas in Haven, we tried the best that we can to allow anyone to speak about anything and to really just open dialogue and debate. And that was, I think, also one of my favorite parts of Haven, is that we'd always end up in a big circle outside in the garden, and it would just keep growing. And it would go from, you know, we'd have talks about the actual screenings that we had every Sunday. So the screenings would end, and after that, we'd have talks about the actual film. If you're having a talk with, you're doing a workshop, it didn't just end with, oh, the workshop's done. There was a discussion that we had after the workshop. And that was always the premise, is that there always has to be a discussion. It can't just be a preaching kind of thing. It's like, I come in and I tell you what I know, yes, but it is only right that I allow you to question it, or to be critical of it, or to build on it. Whatever method that you want to take, or whatever you've taken from it, it needs to be built on with discussion.
Yeah, I was wondering about censorship, because well, one of the questions from the audience also was, how does the Lebanese revolution impact queer art? Is it more visible, or is it still dangerous to be out?
I'm trying to remember where that question is.
Uh-huh.
Hold on a second. Okay. So we can go from here. How does the Lebanese revolution impact queer art?
Yeah.
So we've grown much more visible. Granted, the LGBTQI community was always quite visible, in the sense of it was always working for our rights. There was always being from different organizations and activists within the community. But with the Thawra, we kind of poured down to the streets. Thawra is revolution. So we've grown much more visible, from the graffiti and to being on the front lines. The LGBT community itself closed many roads in the city during the revolution. We're on the front lines from day one. I mean, I remember one night we walked up to the ring, and we were closing the ring, and it was I think like 30 drag queens, and there was lesbians, and it was just, by the end of it, we looked at it, it was like, oh, this is, you know, we're in an LGBTQI party.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so that was part of it. And then they took a lot of they spearheaded a lot. Whether it be the designs that went out, the way the terminology was used. I mean, because we never really understood how to like penetrate particular groups, you know, because in the end, when you do campaigns, or you raise awareness, or you do an exhibition, not everyone comes and sees it. Not everyone is in touch with this campaign, let's say.
Yeah.
But on and throughout the revolution, you're shoulder to shoulder, you know, you're on the streets together. So it's extremely difficult for people not to engage, and not to learn about each other, and not to have these discussions. So a lot of the situations were, let's say there was on particular moments where in Arabic, the word, I'm not going to say the word. I really dislike that word, but it's a pretty much derogatory term used towards LGBTQI, and it's equivalent to the F word in English. And they would say that as a curse towards our politicians. Okay, so they'd be cursing our politicians, but they'd be using that because to them that was how the best way for them to kind of belittle or to offend them. So then now you look all over Beirut, it says in stencils and tags and graffitis everywhere in the city, it says, which means this word is not a curse word. It's not an offensive term. And that had never happened. So on particular points where, like, let's say I would be in the, and I'm a lesbian, so I'm out there in that sense of like, no, I will not allow you to use that word. So before we'd imagine ourselves, like, had we told these people not to use these words, answers would be pretty like defensive. They would say, no, you don't, who are you to dictate how I speak, and they would be most likely defensive and angry. Throughout the revolution, they stopped being that way. When you tell them stop using this word, when they realize you're standing on the front line with them, you're shoulder to shoulder with them. They got hit with a baton just like you got hit with the baton. They're, running from tear gas just like you're running from tear gas. And if anything, you're both equally not afraid. That also kind of propels it forward that you can't use this as an offensive term because we are not something that you should be ashamed of. Yeah. And that kind of slowly, I mean, obviously I don't want to use this as a blanket. Not everyone is like that. But on multiple occasions in which I had been in these chants, and then the feminist community or the LGBTQI community would say, don't use this word. the young boys or the young people that were saying that word, or these people that were using this word, would actually apologize. And that's something that we had to
So
really
that's
encounter.
new.
Yeah, of course. I mean, of course you get it occasionally, but it's not like this. You're not in the middle of a thawra with thousands of people and they all apologize and then switch their chant to use something else. You know, that's also
no, that's not how it happens, I guess.
yeah, and it's also working for the women's community. I mean, the women activists, especially the feminists on the front line, because they're the, I don't want to say they're the pioneers, but they are the most beautiful when they're chanting, because their chants just are so visceral and they encompass everything. So we've on the feminist marches and marches all across Lebanon, not only identified as feminists, they would say بدها تسقط transphobia بدها تفل. Saying transphobia and making people understand that concept in Lebanon, that's also a big deal. So تسقط transphobia is that we want the fall of phobia, we need it to go. They would say we want homophobia to fall and we need it to go. So it would be like, we want capitalism to go, we want homophobia to go, we want the patriarchy to go. And they would,
that's really next level. I mean,
yeah,
to have
that in itself
all of that included. Yeah.
So that in itself is just so empowering, and it just catapulted people's understanding to a different, to a different step. I mean, I'm not saying that this has changed Lebanon, but it slowly, it's a step that we didn't expect to happen that quickly.
And how do you view the role of women in the revolution? One of the questions from the audience was that it was often said that the revolution can only succeed when the demands of women are being met.
Yes.
So how do you view this?
So it says, there was a bigger question to that, right? In autumn, it was often said that in Beirut that the revolution, Thawra, is a woman and can only succeed when the demands of women are being met. How do you view this? And I think that this is a tricky question. Yes, there is a woman because of the women, because the women of Lebanon have made it so. Taking controls of the front line, they've taken control of the rhetoric, they've taken control of the way things are. Cursing in Arabic is most usually directed towards women of the family. Even if you're to curse the man, you end up cursing his mother, his sister, his daughter before you even get to him. So women have changed that rhetoric and have emphasized that many civil status laws that refrain us from being equal to our fellow citizens. So there's always been that rhetoric of, oh, we'll get freedom, then we'll work on women's rights. No. Women's right is freedom. Women's rights are human rights. So it's emphasizing civil status laws as a massive thing that has happened in this thawra. The last time that we had protests, it was based on the garbage crisis. So obviously those were not brought up as much to the forefront because we were, talking about them, of course. And these discussions have always existed in the community and the LGBTQI community and just the human rights defenders all across the country. We're talking about women's right to pass on the nationality. We're not allowed to do that. We don't pass on the nationality to our children. There's the hadani, which is when if you get divorced, the husband gets the child, regardless of if you're capable or not capable of taking care of the child. A beautiful activist passed away recently, whose fight was to just get her daughter back. So we have a lot of these issues that we have to confront when it comes to women's rights in Lebanon. There's actually like this, I mean, it's not as implemented widely, but it does exist as a law that usually your skirt should be to a certain extent. I mean, up until 2017, women who were raped had to marry their rapist, and then the rapist didn't go to jail. So there's a lot of that kind of issues that we still have to work on, whether it be the nationality or rights to office. I mean, we don't have equal representation in parliament, and kind of patting us on the back with giving us 6 ministers does not really do it for me, because what you did is you gave me ministers, you didn't let me vote for my ministers. So there's a lot of these. I mean, they've changed the rhetoric. They've emphasized the many civil status laws that refrain us from being equal citizens to our fellow male citizens. Women have always been in the forefront. It's just now that they're more respected and they're more seen as such. I mean, it could be due to social media. It could be due to many things. But women have always been on the front lines. I mean, they've always sparked massive revolutions and massive protests in Lebanon. It's just more respected as such now. I do like it being called the women's revolution, and I don't at the same time. I mean, for feminist rhetoric that we come from, like reading theory and all of that, we're like, no, we don't want it to be a women's revolution because otherwise you wouldn't call it a male's revolution. But in Beirut, where women had been kind of silenced for so long, to me, how I see it is I look to my mother. So I have a theory and I agree, but my mother doesn't. So I look to my mother and see how she's changed her understanding of who is and her rights and what she demands and what is righteously hers. So my mother was empowered by this. My mother took to the streets because of this, because it was for the first time that she was framed as a woman of other than being a household or other than what they had taught her to be. So for me, yeah, okay, maybe I'm, as a feminist, I read and I go, no, don't call me that. But when I look at my mother, I'm going, no, call it whatever she needs.
Yeah.
Because it's not really about just me or just my generation. It is about the women that have been oppressed far more than us, simply because they've been oppressed for longer. So how do we allow them to understand, or not allow them, but like kind of encourage them? And this just so happened to be a very a big one. And again, it was called the Women's Revolution because women went on the ground. It's not like women went on the ground because of the Women's Revolution, Yeah. I mean, we are 50% of the population. Why would we be any less respected or given less rights?
Yeah, and it's true. I guess it gives a power to it as well to call it a women's revolution, and it's inclusive in that way.
It's a courageous act.
I think that if the revolution in itself does not work to get women's rights, then in itself the revolution has somehow failed, because it failed one of its main contributors. You can't just get rights for one group of people, not everyone. We have to work on all fronts. There is no priority to something than something else. Like, oh, we'll work on this and then we'll see how we get you your rights. No, migrant workers' rights kafala program needs to go. Women's rights need to be worked on. LGBTQI rights need to be worked on. There is no singular front to a revolution. A revolution is fought on all fronts. And luckily, we are doing it. I think it's day 176 in Lebanon.
Oh, wow. And how do you see the revolution continuing now with the coronavirus? And
stronger than ever.
Yeah.
That's the only note I have. Stronger than ever. People are very angry. They're stuck at home. If anything, last month has taught us is that our government took advantage of the fact that we're stuck at home to destroy our tents in different squares. So they removed Saht al-Nur, which is in Tripoli, which was considered the gem of the revolution, because Tripoli went down with such a fierce and beautiful strength throughout the revolution. The square was never empty. There was a kitchen in the square that fed 1,000 people a night.
Community functions in so many different ways.
And that's in Tripoli, not counting Beirut's, hardworking Matbakh al-Balad and all of the people that are also working there. Now I'm just talking about food here. The squares were full, and it gave so much back to our community, because we had always kind of been pushed away from our public spaces. We never had public spaces. We don't have parks. We don't have public spaces that we kind of occupy together. So that also kind of reinforced the separation of regions, because it's not like you can go to central Beirut and go for a walk because you can't afford it. You don't walk in central Beirut because central Beirut is completely privatized. Our downtown is not ours. So reclaiming those spaces was very
different from the rest of the city. It's crazy.
Exactly. It looks, like a poster. And nobody can frequent it. We can't afford coffee there. We couldn't afford anything. And through the revolution, it was reclaimed spaces. So then you had the guy that was selling corn back, the guy that was selling fool back,
doing that work. One of the most important part of that work is also
rejuvenating our city in a sense of really giving it back to the people that it belonged to. They call it solidaire.
That was really interested.
We call it
in when I was in
which is country.
In Lebanon,
so Solidaire is the private
talking
company
about linguistics and
which is
talking
also
about
owned by a
how
politician.
there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in terms of who's writing.
But I want to get back for a moment to queerness in Lebanon, because one of the questions we got is, how did you being in a closet
the
in
people
Lebanon,
doing that work and doing that thinking
because
about how do we
I know
create
you
our
grew
own
up in the
language to
Yeah.
talk about being queer
can you
without it
tell
being
us a
queer
bit
or
about
something
how it
like
was
that.
to be in Lebanon and queer?
And there's a for anyone that's interested,
and I say it all the time, it's my pledge to not leave anyone behind. I experienced being alone and without support from my family for such a long time, whether it was emotional, mental, or physical, or financial. And although that has changed now, it wasn't an easy road. So I do not expect people to just do this on their own. I had a great support system emotionally, as far as my friends that were around me. And I believe the premise of Haven and the premise of what we do is to make people understand that you're not alone in this. This isn't a singular fight. Yes, it's a singular confrontation with your parents, let's say, or whatever, but you're not alone in how you experience it and whose shoulder you can lean on. The closet in Lebanon is very different. The closet in the MENA region is very different than the Western concept of the closet. As we say with the play that we were trying to do for KVS, it was queer courage is a very different approach. It's far more courageous. I don't want to say far more like one is more courageous than the
You
next, but
also
I'm just
did the
saying
same
is
exercise
equally
with
as
our
courageous to stay
artists.
in
You
the
asked us
closet.
courageous act to three artists.
Because what you're doing is you're protecting yourself, you're protecting the people you love, you're protecting even your family. Because when you come out, you don't come out alone in Lebanon. You come out and your whole family is thrust out there as well. So your neighbor has something to say, your grocer has something to say, your uncle, and all of these people also have, your uncle can be the crazy one that shoots you, not your father. So this is something that people kind of overlook. It's courageous to stay in the closet and still be activists, or it's courageous to be in the closet and still just be alive. To have to suffer and know that you're suffering, and know that maybe I could travel, I could leave. Yeah, you can, but that's also a very long road, and until to make sure that you're safe and secure and you're not hurting yourself through this. The whole premise of the project that we wanted to do was to talk about the courage that it took to still be who you are, regardless of if you're out or not. Because there's always this kind of somehow this rhetoric of like, you have to come out to be a part of the community. That to me is ridiculous. I think the community is in itself all-inclusive, whether you're in the closet, out of the closet, if you're LGBTQI or not, it should be one family.
And the community functions in so many different ways and on so many different layers too.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, it's absolutely, it's different because it's a whole different culture. It's a whole different system. I mean, us thinking that it have to take the same steps as, other countries that have done it in the West is ridiculous, because when you come out in the States, or let's say you come out in Europe, you get kicked out of your parents' house if they don't trust you, if they don't love it, if they don't accept you, you get kicked out of the house. In the Middle East, that's a whole different approach. Yeah. Our culture is different. We don't move out when we're 18. We move out when we're married. That's another thing. So these are all things that we need to work on. And that have been changing due to activists, putting their neck out there and doing what they need to do. But it doesn't mean that you need to also be out of the closet to fight for LGBTQI rights. It has nothing to do with it.
Anyway, sorry, Dayna. I should also maybe add, in terms of kind of people doing that work, one of the most important part of that work is also creating language. Language is a very essential part in terms of, kind of part of the conversations I was really interested, in when I was in Lebanon is, talking about linguistics and talking about how, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in terms of who's writing who and how is one being categorized and with what words, mainly English words and French words, so, the people doing that work and doing that thinking about how do we create our own language to talk about being queer without it being queerini or something like that.
Yeah, queer.
And there's for anyone that's interested, there's definitely a really nice article that just been published on Mo magazine by folks from Haven. So definitely check that out.
Absolutely. They really do frame it and make it kind of more digestible, because you can really break it down. When it comes to language, is a very important thing, and history is another important thing. That we don't have history about LGBTQI activists or women's rights. And that in itself is very detrimental, because we always have to end up looking to I could automatically tell you that sitting in I think you were there for that talk when I said that, can you guys name 3 activists from Europe, and they were able to name them, and I said name 3 Arab activists, none of them had a clue. That in itself was a very monumental moment for them, because it was just looking at them like, we don't know anything about our history, because they'd rather we not know. And in the end, our history is written through Western eyes. So, like, we need
to
start.
You also did the same exercise with our artists. You asked the students to name 3 artists.
So, also name 3 artists that are from Europe, and they were all like, yeah. And I'm like, all right, now 3 Middle Easterns or somebody from North Africa. Silence. And that is also just, and I'm one of them. Like, I had to self-train myself, because I was raised in the States, and I realized that I didn't identify as much with Western understanding of how things are coming out, or because you look at things and you're like, oh, okay, I grew up in the States, so everybody's coming out, and that's actually harder, because you still live within
Well,
a
I
Middle
mean,
Eastern household.
if
It's
you
not
don't
like
mind,
suddenly my mother's
maybe
Americanized.
try to
You know, my
answer
mother
that
is still
question
Lebanese,
thinking
my
about
father is
Toni
still Lebanese, my
Morrison.
uncles are still
You know,
Lebanese. Their best friends that come over for dinner
this
every Sunday are
is
still
a
Lebanese.
similar question, but
Still
in
have the
a
same
very different way,
mentality.
of
If anything,
course.
they
You
got
know,
stuck in the
that
mentality when
Toni
they left.
Morrison
So
got,
if they left in the 80s,
almost
that
throughout her
mentality is the
whole
last mentality
career.
they have. They haven't
You know,
upgraded.
definitely up
And
until
then
the
the
last
90s
20
and
years
so
of
on and
her,
so
you
forth.
know,
So it's
of her
actually even
life. You
harder
know,
because when you
like,
step outside of your house, you have one idea of
why are
reality.
you
And
a
when you're
black
inside of
artist?
your
Why
house,
do
you
you
have
only
another
write
idea of
about black,
reality.
you know,
Yeah.
So that makes it a lot more
characters?
difficult
Coming
to
out in
You know,
different ways, I guess. Yeah,
think that
different within a family
until
and
mainstream
out.
kind of
So
society
another thing
or
we were asked
mainstream
is
cultural
why do you
art
want everyone to know that you're
spaces
queer?
start to give
And
more
because
space,
the
more
person who asked the
safer
question
space to, you know,
says that
whether it's, you
being
know,
your
queer
sexual identity is
artists
something
or
private.
Mm.
It shouldn't be taboo, but
individuals
it's also something
from, you
private and
know,
personal.
different backgrounds.
And
You
so their
know,
question is,
we
why
need
do
to
you
continue to pay
proclaim
attention
being
to
queer?
who is doing
Well, when
the
I did,
work. You
I
know,
did it with Tanya
we
Safi
can't just
lately. It was the
assume
first time
that,
I
you
came out with the
know,
video.
everyone has the
And
same type of
first of all, I don't want everyone to
kind
know.
of
I don't need my uncles to know. That's
representation
something. Let's just get that out of the
And
way.
you're like
space.
calling everyone
You
up,
know,
and
so
Yeah, it's not like I DM people like, "Hey,
it's
did
not
you?"
about, you know, putting
That's not something.
identity in people's face.
I haven't gotten there yet, and I don't
I
think I
would
will.
just say once again, definitely read that article. We are here, and we I hope we can make a link to it because I think that is, you know, that kind of partly answers that question too.
Okay.
Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, we'd love to
Oh
read
no,
it.
not at all. No, it's definitely. So the first is I don't come out to everyone. When I did come out in that video, it was mainly a reaction to that misconception that being LGBTQI is a Western concept. I wanted to say I'm an Arab queer woman, and I'm an Arab lesbian woman, more like precisely. I'm a lesbian Arab woman, and I needed to say that, and that's why I also made like the follow-up joke of, oh, I also have tattoos. The simple misconception of like, oh, women in the East, they're not queer, or they're not out, or they're not proud of themselves. No, we are. We're just different, and that's absolutely acceptable. And it shouldn't be a set kind of checklist that I need to tick to be identified as a lesbian internationally. Like, I am a lesbian Arab woman, and that's why I came out that way. It's just to kind of challenge that concept of that it's just a Western concept. No, we're far beyond that. And I think that question in itself has become redundant. So that was mainly why I did that. So again, I don't want everyone to know. They did have the follow-up that you're talking about, that it's not taboos. And then they talked about, isn't it more important in Lebanon, elsewhere, to know that you're an artist and that you simply make your own art known first. So I'm not simply an artist. This is just to follow up on that. I'm not just an artist. Part of my struggle is to grasp and combine the many elements of my identity. I refuse to be identified as one or the other. I actually wrote a piece called Feed One and Drown Out the Other, as if we had to pick one and that was it. I am an Arab, lesbian, writer, and woman. Therefore, when and if I can be respected for all of those things that make me up, will I feel like I am accepted. It's not like you can accept one of these elements. Oh, you're an artist. Okay, great. I accept you as an artist. I also don't want that, because we have this kind of rhetoric of like, oh, artists are more free, or artists can do more. No, we can be LGBTQI and be artists and be women and still be oppressed. They're all of these. So
yeah, because I feel like, well, one of the concerns in this question was, or a similar one about literature, is whether focusing on the LGBTQI theme or whatever identity of the artwork, or a book, does it isn't it, if the question is if it's redundant to do that, as if you're maybe not focusing on the art so much, but on
Well, I mean, if you don't mind, maybe try to answer that question thinking about Toni Morrison. This is a similar question, but a very different way, of course. That Toni Morrison got, almost throughout her whole career. Definitely up until the last 20 years of her, of her life. Why are you a Black artist, and why do you only write about Black, you know, characters? I think that until mainstream kind of society or mainstream cultural art spaces start to give more space, more safer space to, whether it's, queer artists or individuals from, different backgrounds, we need to continue to pay attention to who is doing the work. You know, we can't just assume that, you know, everyone has the same type of kind of representation within these spaces. You know, so it's not about, you know, putting identity in people's faces. I think that the more important work is about saying, we are here and we need to take more space, you know, that different types of voices within the queer community, you know, because the queer community is not one, it's communities. You know, until we have enough space for that within, you know, popular literature or mainstream culture or society, I think that we need to continue to name these things, you know.
I think I completely, you just said it's 100% that it's about, so I'll give you an example. A friend of mine wanted to come out, and she went online and she was Googling people that have come out to their parents. And the videos that she saw, or the movies that she had access to, were all of a particular background, you know, whether it be from the States or white or this or that or this or that. She got to a point where she's like, okay, so that means I shouldn't come out. That means I don't exist. Not that I shouldn't come out, because it doesn't really matter if you come out or not. You exist whether you come out or not. But the representation that's there also says that you don't really have this space in the first place.
Just, I mean,
you're not represented,
you know,
and that also kind of plays into, subconsciously at least, to how people feel, as far as like, do I matter? Does my story matter? Am I valid enough to share my story? And I think it's super important to understand that, yeah, we need, I hate it as well. I mean, I don't want to like deter from that. Yes, I want to be someone that's referred to as an artist and not as a female artist. But at the same time, I know that most of the times that I am exhibited, it's one female out of 50 males. You know, so it's not really about that. It's just about really just taking over that space, and to make people realize that until we get to a point where people realize and people can subconsciously automatically assume all of these things,
you know, I was
we need to say
privilege to be one of the first people to
that's still a long way, I guess. So that's and well, following up on this question was,
moving.
Is there such a thing as queer art or heterosexual
creative
art?
Piece of writing, you know, was incorporating poetry and also different realities and different types of movements.
I think it's for every single person to define for themselves, especially the artists themselves.
Really,
I don't think, we can assume it's people like, hey, be free, do what you want, you know, and at the same time, but like, these are the words you're allowed to use to define yourself. You know, we can't also do that. We can't give freedom and at the same time limit it. We can't assume freedom and at the same time not have it. All of these things are completely redundant. And in the end, it is up to the artist. It is not up to the gallery, and it's not up to the freaking curator. It's up to the artist, how that artist wants to identify. And if that artist says, I don't want to be identified as queer, then go ahead, right ahead. You know, that's the artist's choice. It's not our choice. And I think it's a very, you know, it goes back to every single artist and how they feel towards their piece and how they feel about exhibiting that piece. Some artists, you know, don't want the word there, but all of their art is just about, let's say, not being able to come out, or issues that they faced in their communities. They don't want to put the word there, but the art speaks for itself sometimes. But at the same time, it also can make the artist feel like they're not identified. They are. So it's really up to that artist and the freedom range that they have.
Can you talk a bit about your own artist practice as a writer?
Yeah.
I mean, you're a poet, no?
Yeah. Yes. I have never censored myself, and I think this was also a big. It took a lot of learning. You know, I used to censor myself. I used to write like people would like to hear me say. I used to, you know, do a lot of rhyme, which was not a proud moment in my life.
You have to start somewhere.
But, you know, it was just because but I had, you know, I'd been to a lot of poetry shows, and that was all I was seeing at that point. I was like, okay, and I want to be accepted on these tables, so I'm going to speak the same way, and I did. And it took me a very long time to find my own voice. And I don't think I have it 100% yet. I don't think it's possible for a person to 100% accumulate their voice. I think it's ever changing, ever growing, ever expanding, maybe retracting, whatever it may be, but it's always kind of this process. With my writing, it's, especially recently, has become a lot more critical of myself. I be my own therapist in a way,
Mm-hmm.
and try to build on my own understanding of why I say or why I feel the way I do. A lot of my work is about my identity, and my identity. I don't like the word crisis because I'm not in crisis. I'm coming to terms with all of these things, but what it is that I was so misled in what all of these things meant. It was very definitive. This is what this is. This is what this is. This is what this is. And it took me a long time to get to a point where I could write something like Feed One and Drown Out the Other, where it's talking about all of my identities and me being proud of all of them equally, and understanding that I don't need to pick an allegiance to one identity.
Mm-hmm.
All of these are what make me up.
Yeah. Can you start over, please?
No, I was just saying, just a very gifted writer too. I was given the privilege to be one of the first people to read the script of Slow 5 Core Courage, and it's a very, moving and also beautiful. Yeah. No, that's. I mean, that's piece. No, that's a really important point that which was incorporating poetry and also kind of different realities and different types of movements. So I'm just saying, very appreciate the work that you're intricately putting out there, politics, or the work I've seen. Actually, also, I hope we'll still find we're working on a way ability for individuals to get social kind of welfare or something like that. Yeah, I hope so that's why it's important to say no pressure, KBS. Cool. In the same way that we understand.
And Haven, what role does literature play there? Do you organize?
Well, yeah, of course. We've hosted poetry sessions since our inception.
Open mic or more?
We had lineups with open mics.
Yeah.
With both. When I say that we first started as pop-ups, it was actually first 2 singers and 2 poets. So it always started with poetry. Poetry always existed in Haven, and it continues to this day. And recently, in the last year and a half, I would assume, I'm not really great with. Lisa Lux, the poet that Tunde mentioned earlier, started something called the Sisterhood Salons, and Haven supports, supported by Haven originally because it was done in the Haven spaces, and then afterwards Haven is always there to support, whether with visual arts or with poets or with whatever. So Lisa started this thing called the Sisterhood Salon, which is it's a feminist literary kind of, it's a spoken word salon. So feminists can come in together, and we just women and feminists and men and allies and just everyone that can really add to the conversation and be able to expand on women's rights and women's emotions and the trials and tribulations that they go through. So the Sisterhood Salons are probably one of the most, for me, I have to do a shout out for Lisa. She is my best friend, and I always say that Lisa kind of re-sparked the writer in me. She's just a brilliantly inspirational woman and just a great activist and just a brilliant poet. So what she does is we come into the salon and there are poetry lineups. So these women poets read. And then from there, we discuss feminist texts and literature issues. Let's say sometimes politics is brought in because the person was political. And we build from there. And it's just a big open circle where even when, let's say when I do read myself, I go up and I read and I come down and there's an open discussion about my piece. So it's not just like, here's a pat on the back, you did great. It's also us building on this. And every time I walk into the Sisterhood Salon, I come out a better woman. And that's probably one of my favorite things.
Sounds great. And so one more question I have for you is that I read online that Haven for Artists calls itself an apolitical organization.
Not anymore.
No? Okay.
It was in 2007.
Okay. Interesting. Well, you should check your Wikipedia page.
I didn't even know I had a Wikipedia page.
You do. And there it's a quote.
Definitely not apolitical.
It confused me because it's with a quote from you.
I'm going to say goodbye.
As proof. So anyway, so my question was, but isn't then making art in such a space or creating things there in itself in Lebanon politically?
Yeah, of course. No. This is what we were trying to do originally, because in Lebanon, the political thing, being political, is a very different understanding than what it is in the West. Because then you have an allegiance to a particular sect.
See
So
it.
when we use the word apolitical, it was a
Right.
completely different understanding.
Mm,
We are not apolitical. If you go on our website, it doesn't say
yeah.
that anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
We are not
Yeah,
apolitical.
Okay.
yeah. No, that's, I
I
mean,
just
that,
needed to check. Yeah.
no, that's a really important point that, being political and definitely in the Lebanese context where you have all these different confessions and different sects, tied very intricately to politics and actually also kind of the ability for individuals to get social kind of welfare or something like
Yeah.
that.
So it's all
So that's why it's important to say apolitical, but it's not in the same way that we understand it.
But we removed that because we understood that there could be a confusion in that, because I wasn't going to come
Mm.
up into a panel every time someone.
Yeah.
You know,
Sorry about that. Yeah.
No, not at all. Because
No
this
worries.
was actually brought up to us. I think it was 3 years ago by a person now that I consider a good friend, and he made it a joke like, "Oh, Haven is apolitical, lol," and I was really hurt by that, because I was like, we are trying to not be connected to any of these militias, but then we also came to terms with the fact that we need to take a stand that we are against these militias as well. And the only way to do that is to remove apolitical. So we're non-governmental, we're non-profit, and our main kind of mission is our causes, not our politics. So we will fight for women's rights and LGBTQI rights. And the personal, again, is political. So it's very hard for me to even stand by that quote.
Yeah.
And I think that's also part of like growing older and kind of changing, because Haven originally was just art. It was just, giving space for artists to come and express themselves. Now it's for artists and activists. Now it's an intersection of both.
Yeah.
It's grown into whatever the community has molded it to be. Haven has never set itself a mold and then said, okay, everybody, this is who we are, now follow suit. No, it's always been, what is the community talking about? What does the community require? How can we do this? And how can we ensure that we're not kind of closing the doors on anything else? So it's just about change and growth. And hopefully we're going on the right track.
Definitely on the right track. Hopefully
Sounds
the
like
work
it.
keeps on, being supported.
Yeah, so I wanted to also say, because the part of that quote is, it says, changing through policy, not being abrasive, not going to the streets and protest, only art will save us. Art will save us, but I say protest. Now I say protest. At 31 and 3.5 years later, I say protest. I say go to the streets and protest. It was a completely different context back then. And again, in the last 3-4 years, I have changed profoundly, and so has Haven. And the people that volunteer in Haven have changed differently. And they themselves as people have also changed, not personally. Like Leon has become a different person, but at the same time, there have been new people brought into Haven. So the whole premise of Haven is never just saying, oh, this is who we are, it's set in stone and never changes. Policies and people change all the time. And the best thing is to ensure that we're constantly there to help the community and to assist anyone who needs, things happening there in their area.
We're
amazing.
evolving and a work in progress.
Yeah. We actually have a sign in Haven that always says that Haven is always going to be a work in progress.
Like us all. Unfortunately, I have to go to my next meeting now.
Yes.
So I'm going to have to say goodbye. Dayna, we'll keep in touch, but it was good to see you again, and stay safe and be sane too, because being indoors in New York.
Well, no, I'm lucky. I have great roommates. They're wonderful. They cook great food and they have a garden. So we just do carpentry at the same time.
Lucky you. All right. Well, enjoy. We'll talk soon. All right. Bye, Tessa.
Bye.
All right. See you.
See you.
All right.
No, I skipped over one question that I will just ask you to round off, which is, what is your favorite LGBTQ plus book? I thought I will end with a very short question.
Well, I like that you think that that's going to be a short one.
It can be. It's your choice.
Okay. So I always, I don't have a favorite LGBTQI book. The other day I posted something on Instagram that was like, please can someone give me a lesbian film that is not, them ending up getting married or them, stumbling onto their sexuality because they had a boyfriend, but then they saw this gorgeous woman and they couldn't anymore. Can we just have a lesbian who already knows that she's a lesbian and she falls in love with another lesbian?
Yeah, just normal life.
Just a normal, to depict us in a normalized sense, to humanize it.
Not always the coming out story.
Not always a stumble, for some reason lesbians stumble onto each other. That's never happened to me. I've had to be very aware that I was a lesbian to stumble onto another lesbian. So so I don't have a LGBTQI book, although the new lady, Portrait of a Lady on Fire is beautiful.
Oh yes.
But again, she ends up getting married to a man. But I love the ending scene because it just
Yeah.
shows that love transcends that marriage, and she
Mhm.
continues to
It's
care for her.
ambiguous in a way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I just like it through the female gaze. It was just beautiful to finally see it like that. It wasn't through a male gaze. But I do have a favorite feminist writer, and that is Nawal Saadawi. Part of my mission is to also bring to light the LGBTQI women's artists and activists of the Middle East. History was written by the West, like I was saying, and our history doesn't exist through our own eyes, not fully and not wholly without some kind of compromise. We've been censored, and I hope one day, instead of looking to the activists of Stonewall, I can look to the activists of the Nile, the ports of Beirut, and the ports of Tripoli, and so forth. That is my dream. But then again, at the same time, Anna Nawal Saadawi changed a lot for me. The things that she said throughout were just it just reconstituted that I am a very proud. I am proud to be Arab, but at the same time, there are a lot of things that I need to change in my Arabness or in the space that I'm in. And hearing it from the mouth of Nawal was extremely empowering. And I have to give it up for Layan for bringing Nawal into my life. And actually, how I found out about her was the Haveners were feeling a little claustrophobic one day, and then we're like, "Hey, just go crazy and do whatever you want with the baths, just like paint." Because at the other day we had exhibitions in the other rooms, and they just wanted to kind of like express. So now, one of the Haveners wrote this quote inside the bathroom, and ever since then I've just been taken by it, where she says, "They said you are a savage and dangerous woman. I am speaking the truth, and the truth is savage and dangerous." So to me, Nawal is my favorite writer currently, and again, that's the whole point, is you continue to change writers. I mean, I have 2 books here, and it's just Angela Davis and then Nawal Dawi, so I'm always growing.
Can you name it the title of the book?
So reading for Nawal is Woman at the one I read for Nawal recently is Woman at Point Zero, and the other one for Angela Davis is Freedom is a Constant Struggle. It's about Ferguson, Palestine, and the foundations of a movement. And I'm also reading Identity Poetics, which is pretty much, I can give you a background. Queer theory asserts Linda Garber, praise and vilifies lesbian feminism, missing its valuable insights and ignoring its rich contributions. So it's also just trying to bridge my many identities together. But to end on Nawal, I have triumphed over both life and death because I no longer desire to live, nor do I any longer fear to die. I want nothing, I hope for nothing, I fear nothing, therefore I am free.
Wow.
And now we can end the talk.
That's very fun. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Dayna, for this conversation. It was
Thank
really a pleasure talking.
You too. Thank you so much for hosting us, and
Yes,
hopefully when all of this is over, we can all get together again.
That would be great. Yeah. Bye.
Have a great one.